Yo, it's your boy Logos, and today I want to react to Oversimplified's World War I series because I think in this day and age we all need a healthy reminder of how tragic and destructive war can be for everybody involved, especially when it's on a global scale. And from the beginning and to the end of this war, it is nothing but sadness and tragedy if you ask me. From the assassination to the lives of the men in the trenches and the amount of millions and millions of people that were lost, the amount of wealth and potential that was lost, the amount of dreams and families and generations that were lost, and even going up to the end of the war, the Treaty of Versailles, which led to World War II, and we all know how that happened. Who knows, if this war didn't happen, we could have avoided everything. Or who knows, it might have ended up worse. But when you see how World War I lead to World War II, and then you have the Cold War and nukes involved, and then look at the modern day, what we have to deal with right now with all the conflict, I don't know, I think World War I is just a very clear picture of how badly things can go. Especially when you have certain people in charge that don't care about or really don't live in the shoes of the men on the ground. Some of the stories that you can hear about what these men had to go through, it is truly heartbreaking and disgusting and tragic. So I'll definitely cut in a lot during this video and as I go through the series because I feel like those stories need to be told. So let's get into it.
The world of 1914, a time of modern technology, culture, and fashion. Truly the height of civilization. Let's have a war. Everyone knew a big war was coming. France wanted some stuff back that Germany had taken from it. Germany wanted to take more of everyone's stuff, and they were building a big sexy navy that was making the British uncomfortable. These two empires thought they were really cool, but lots of different people who lived there didn't think it was so cool. And some of them had even been declaring independence with help from Russia. Everyone was talking about each other behind each other's backs. Throw in the fact that military technology had come a long way since the last major war, and suddenly everyone was pretty eager to beat each other up. In this area of Austria-Hungary lived some Serbs and Bosnians who hated living in Austria-Hungary. So the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand goes there for a nice drive in an open-top car with his car's route published in advance. And that went just about as well as you'd expect. Some assassins were waiting for him along the way and threw bombs at his car, but they missed and blew up some officers behind him instead. So the Archduke goes into hiding, leaves Sarajevo, and the whole war never happens. Except no, the Archduke doesn't leave, but instead goes back out in the open-top car to visit the injured officers in hospital. The driver takes a wrong turn and by sheer coincidence gets stuck beside one of the failed assassins, who shoots him. Austria-Hungary is
The chances of that happening is so slim to none, but think about it, it actually does happen in our timeline if you live in a multiverse or something like that. And it leads to this global war where millions and millions of people are killed, all because of this one shot and because of, like he's going to go into, all these major countries having alliances together, partially thanks to Otto von Bismarck and other people being involved before this time period. But even still, this leads to this whole global conflict. And Russia, I think, should get a big share of the blame, in my opinion, simply because of the fact that they really couldn't stop the mobilization. They had the option to, but once they started mobilizing their military and getting troops ready and moving to the ground, then you had no choice. If you ask me, I'm just putting myself in Germany's shoes. Unfortunately, in this situation, if you see the person on your border that you're not allied to mobilizing their army and starting to move on you just in case something happens, of course you're naturally going to defend yourself. And I think he's probably going to go into it. But Germany has a Schlieffen plan. It's called the Schlieffen plan. And the whole idea of the plan is to take on France and Russia at the same time. But you're relying on Russia being slow in mobilization so you can knock out France before Russia can be even ready. And once you knock out France, you'll come back and knock out Russia. But if Russia is mobilizing and you're not, you're going to lose that time window that you have to take care of France before Russia is on your doorstep. And I think from my understanding, at the top of the map right here in Germany is like the ancestral home of the Russian, German like aristocracy. So they really don't want this area to be taken over, but it's right on the border of Russia.
is understandably pissed about all this, and they think the Serbian government had something to do with it, which they might have. So they go to their ally Germany and say, "Hey Germany, we're going to declare war on Serbia."
Oh, I'm sorry I gotta stop again, but I should have said it when it first popped up. Oh no, you got that face. one of the reasons why the Archduke Franz Ferdinand got assassinated, because on that day of the tour that he was visiting Serbia, or I'm sorry, visiting Sarajevo, was I think an anniversary of some tragic military event for Serbia, and they took that as an insult. So him coming there during that time period, they took it as himself sort of like rubbing it in of that tragedy that happened with Serbia. I can't remember the exact name, but I know that's had something to deal with it. But it's also tragic too, because Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he was actually kind of friendly to Serbia. Like there was other people within Austria-Hungary that didn't really like the Serbians, and they wasn't really friendly with how they treated the Serbian people. But Franz Ferdinand was actually trying to change that. And once he got into power, if he did, he probably would have treated the Serbian people a lot better than they previously was treated. So it is pretty tragic that they killed one of their best allies within Austria-Hungary. And Serbia ends up losing a fourth of their population by the end of this war. 25% of the people within Serbia would no longer be there by 1918, 1919.
Might have. So they go to their ally Germany and say, hey Germany, we're going to declare war on Serbia, and Germany is all for that. So Austria-Hungary send a big list of impossible demands to Serbia, and when Serbia refuses, they declare war. Austria-Hungary and Germany are friends, and Serbia is protected by Russia, who's friends with France, so they'll declare war on each other. Montenegro joins in too. France and Britain also have a kind of alliance, so when France says, hey Britain, you got my back? Britain is like, maybe? And then they decide to stay out of it, which is great for Germany, because Germany has a plan. They know that Russia is so big and clumsy that it will take them a while to get ready for war. So with this guy in charge, Germany will send all its troops into France at lightning speed while Russia's getting ready, defeat France, then move all the troops to Russia and defeat Russia, and then we all speak German and eat Pfefferpottast every day. Just one problem. France has loads of forts and defenses along its German border, and Germany can't waste any time fighting them, so Germany decides to go around them, through Belgium. Belgium is neutral, but Germany wants to march 750,000 troops through it to get around France's defenses. They're hoping Belgium will just kind of sit down and shut up, but they don't. They fight back, and they're pretty good too, so they slow the Germans down. What's worse is that Britain shows up, and they're pretty pissed that Germany's invading neutral countries. So now Britain declares war on Germany.
But here's the thing, like, Germany really tried to do everything they could to keep Britain out of this war. Because if you ask me, and I think if you ask anybody else that have studied this war or try to get some understanding of it, Germany probably wins this war if it's not for Great Britain, especially because of their navy and their blockade of Germany, which he's probably gonna go into probably pretty soon. But I can understand why Germany said, screw it, we gotta go through Belgium. Because like you said, these forts right here, and this is even before everybody understood the power of defense. Everything was focused on their offensive attacking, but people really didn't get an idea of machine guns and high power artillery. You had some of that within the Russo-Japanese War and a couple other conflicts, but it was nothing to this scale. So they had a good reason to go through Belgium, if you ask me, and the whole plan hinges on getting able to knock out France before Russia is ready. So if you waste any time trying to fight through here, you're gonna, one, kill so many of your own troops, and two, it's gonna take you a lot longer compared to going through Belgium, and you can go around their flank and maybe even circle them from behind, like Knie or something else. Like it makes absolute sense for Germany to do this, and at this point they had without a doubt the best army in the world. So you can't blame Germany at all for doing this. This was their best shot at winning this war. And if Great Britain stays out of this war, I would bet money that they win it. And once you go further into the war and see how inept Russia is, you'll see why. But Germany had the best army in the world at this time.
So Germany push on through Belgium and commit some atrocities along the way. They also wear spikes and sometimes skulls on their uniform. So if you're trying to not look like the bad guys, good job. The Allies have a propaganda extravaganza, and this starts having an influence around the world, notably in America. The US President Woodrow Wilson sees himself as a bit of a Jesus figure, and spends most of the war trying to get everyone to just hug it out. But there's also a large population of ethnic Germans living in the United States, and when the war first broke out, they were like, yay Germany! But now that they're committing atrocities in Belgium, they're less enthusiastic. Let's play Spot the French Soldier.
This
Do
is
you see
not
him?
good.
Easy, right? He's wearing a bright blue uniform with red trousers. And do you know who else spotted him easily too?
German
Germans.
machine guns.
So when the French were slowly marching in columns through the countryside, the Germans easily tore them to shreds with their giant guns. All the nations involved in this war went in with an old school war mentality, and all of them had to update their uniforms and tactics a lot during the Great War.
And from my understanding, I don't even think Russia ever gets helmets. They're still using like caps, like leather caps, to protect their soldiers' heads. Eventually, United States, Great Britain, and France, they end up using helmets to protect their soldiers' heads. But it's crazy at the start of this war, and at least for the first year or so, they're just wearing like caps, leather caps, which has no protection from shrapnel or any other type of explosive or anything else. And so many of these artillery shells has like fragmentations or fragments in them that explode like a grenade, and they'll kill a whole bunch of your soldiers. But also sometimes they really don't do damage depending on what thing they're actually hitting. Like against barbed wire, they're not doing any damage to that. But against your actual troops on the ground that are exposed in the open, yeah, they're gonna kill them, unfortunately. And that's part of the reason why you have trenches being made. You have to get underground. We have machine guns, and you have all this artillery. Like millions and millions and millions of shells are being fired off within these confined spaces or within confined areas of the Western Front. And people are just getting decimated. It causes people to go crazy just because of all the destruction and just all the noise and explosions just constantly going off. And it doesn't stop.
Because this war was going to be like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Russia's ready for war, and way earlier than expected. Hey, Austria-Hungary, can you get on top of that?
Nope.
Oh yeah, sure, we've got this. Nope. So Germany has to send some troops back to the east to defend against the Russians. The chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army is this guy, and although he is handsome, he turns out not to be the best military strategist. Austria-Hungary constantly ignores Germany's advice, and then comes running back to Germany whenever they get in trouble. Austria-Hungary even gets its ass kicked by tiny Serbia, who repels all their invasion attempts at the start of the war. It's better news for Germany in the north, though, where they almost completely wipe out the Russian Second Army. Back on the west...
This battle,
better news for Germany in the north,
I just want to talk about just a tiny bit. The Battle of Tannenberg is one of the best like military maneuvers I remember. Just simply because of the fact how they deploy like Napoleonic type tactics and split up this army or these armies in half and just knock them out one by one. And actually, the Russians caused the Germans to be so scared of them getting to actual like Berlin and Germany and the aristocracy, like is right here what I was referring to earlier. They were so worried about that happening because of them mobilizing so much quickly than everybody else expected, that they sent troops from the Western Front over here that wasn't really needed. But luckily, I guess it kind of worked out because those same troops that they sent over that wasn't necessary end up helping kill the Second Army here at the Battle of Tannenberg. And it was just absolute like catastrophic defeat for Russia. And it happens over and over again. Just human wave attacks. And when you really look into it, you can understand why the country fell apart. The Tsar was already unpopular. I think one of his relatives, I think maybe his grandfather or someone's like closely related to him, was like killed or assassinated in front of him. So Russia was already on the edge. This war just finally killed them over. Same with Ottoman Empire, same with Austria-Hungary.
Second Army. Back on the Western Front, the Germans continue advancing and are in sight of Paris. At this point, anyone would be forgiven for thinking the Germans were going to get that quick victory after all. But then things start to go wrong. The French commander-in-chief knew something had to be done, and he ordered his armies to stop retreating. In the resulting battle, a gap opened up in the German lines. If a gap opens up, the enemy can use it to flank you from the side and behind, so the German armies have to retreat. The Allies launch a counterattack, so the Germans dig into defensive positions.
And this is, and my understanding, this is only like the first year of the war. Within the first like 3 months or even just the first month, there's like 1 million casualties already. People are like 250,000 people, 300,000 people are casualties during each operation or offensive. Because I would say, and most people would say offensive and operation is much more of a accurate way to describe these like battles, quote unquote, because they last so long. Usually battles only last like 1 or 2 days, maybe a really long one would maybe lasts like a week, but that's not constant fighting. But this is like constant fighting. You have constant artillery going off. If there's a no man's land, it is like hell on earth here. And this is only the first like month or few months of the war.
The Allies do the same. Then both sides move north, trying to outflank each other along the way. When they reach the sea, they're in a stalemate with trench systems running the whole way from the coast to Switzerland, the beginning of trench warfare on the Western Front. Here's how trench warfare works. Two opposing lines of trenches with no man's land in between. One side would pummel the other with hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, sometimes for days at a time. This had a huge psychological effect on the soldiers, leaving many shell-shocked. Then, the attacking troops would leave their trenches and rush across no man's land, a muddy wet mass of shell craters and barbed wire.
And dead
The
bodies.
defending trench would unleash machine gun fire on the attackers, inflicting thousands of casualties. The attackers would send wave after wave until either they gave up or the opposing trench was finally overrun. There would be months of fighting and the deaths of thousands in order to gain a few meters or kilometers of land.
And let's not forget what he said about the no man's land is absolutely true. But even sticking your head up out your trench could get you shot and killed by snipers or machine gunners or anybody. So imagine trying to live your life while dealing with artillery. So having to use a bathroom, trying to eat, and you have artillery going off. You have to use a bathroom around you. You have dead bodies around you. They're decaying around you. You have rats around you. Everything that is horrible that you could possibly imagine the situation is happening. And we didn't even get to the poison gas yet.
Living in the trenches was hard work too. Corpses, mud that could swallow you whole, pools of poisonous water.
Especially, I think those pictures right there are from Verdun. And Verdun is probably going to be in the part 2 because that's like in the 1916, 1915. And from my understanding, or from my point of view, to be honest with you, I think that's one of the worst battles, well, operations or whatever you want to call it, of the whole war. And once you get into the details of it, you'll see why. Just turning forest or frontier land into just a place that looks like the moon, filled with gas and water, filled with dead bodies. And like you said, if you fall into one of those giant craters, you're gone. Like, you're not coming back out of that. All that stuff that is in there, you're done.
Rats, disease, the smell. It's insane that millions of soldiers put up with these conditions, and commanders ordered them to do so for years.
Let's just go right into part 2. Screw it.
With both sides stuck in a hard stalemate, they knew this war wasn't going to be about taking territory, but about simply wearing each other down. The Allies had plenty of men to expend from its overseas dominions, and the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import stuff, like food. Neither side really wanted a long, grueling war though, so they both thought of ways to break the deadlock on the Western Front. Idea number 1, new frontiers. When the war first broke out, Australia was quick to take German New Guinea. The Allies also quickly jumped on Germany's colonies in Africa, and particularly in German East Africa, locals were enlisted as soldiers and carriers by both sides, leading to a tragic loss of life for the native Africans. Some new combatants entered the war as well. The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Japan was busy building itself an empire, so it was more than happy to take away German islands and colonies in East Asia. Italy actually had an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary before the war, but after some tense relations, and then the Allies promising to give them some of Austria-Hungary's stuff, they switched sides. Italy opened up a front in the mountains here, but like everyone else, they were stuck in stalemate for most of the war. The Central Powers' new friend was a struggling empire in the Middle East. The Ottomans were divided on whether to actually join the war or not, since they had been exhausted by the recent Balkan Wars. Some of the politicians who did want to join went off on their own and fired some shells at Russia, and then came back and said, "Whoops, looks like we're at war now." The Ottoman entry into the war was of particular concern to the British, since the Middle East was full of oil, and Britain wanted all of that oil. First, the Ottomans tried to attack Russia in the Caucasus Mountains, but they weren't prepared for the cold, and many of them froze to death. Then they crossed miles of desert to take the Suez Canal from the British, but that failed too. Then the Allies tried to take the Dardanelles at Gallipoli in a long and hard trench warfare campaign, but that also failed. The Ottomans blamed their initial losses on the ethnic Armenians living within Ottoman territory, and the resulting Armenian genocide led to the deaths of 1.5 million people. Then the Germans sent spies into Afghanistan to try to convince the Arab tribes there to rise up in jihad against the British and attack India. But that plan failed, partly because the spies got bored, brewed their own alcohol, and got drunk, which is a bad thing to do in Afghanistan. All these new frontiers hadn't done much to change the war. Aware that the Allies had more men and supplies than them, the Germans knew they had to do something to break the stalemate. Before the war, there was a big conference that set out the rules of modern warfare. No chemical weapons, no killing civilians. Basically, don't be jerks. The Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas, and they used submarines to sink.
And it's not funny, but it is like it's almost like a really, are you serious? So like he said, the Hague conference. The Hague conference. They said you can't use chemical weapons. So the people, like the diplomats and the people within Germany at the time that try to, read treaties or read international agreements, like lawyers and such and so forth, they said we can't use weapons. But what if we just, took out cans of chlorine gas to the battlefield and just took the tops off and let the wind carry it towards the lines? We're not really using, weapons, so we're technically not breaking any agreement. We're just, still using them, but we're not using them within a weapon. We're just letting it do what it do. We're basically just letting the air work for us. So if you think that's breaking the law, I don't know what to tell you. Do you hate air? Like, it was like insane, the stuff that people would come up with to try to break through this stalemate, because honestly millions of people were suffering because of this at the home front and on the western front and the eastern front. People are losing the ability to eat and losing the amount of calories they can eat within a day. People are rationing because all this material and all this stuff has to go towards the army. And when you have to do multiple offensives, that means multiple times you have to gather all this different stuff like food and shells and ammunition and guns and all these different types of things just for the sake of taking a few meters of land. Like, it's insane when you think about it.
The Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas, and they used submarines to sink civilian ships. One such civilian ship was the Lusitania, which had 159 Americans on board when it was sunk, further swaying US opinion against the Germans. Not to be completely unfair to the Germans, the Allies also engaged in chemical warfare soon after, and they had been hiding anti-submarine weapons on their civilian ships, which let the Germans justify their attacks.
And Woodrow Wilson was a two-faced, we're gonna be honest, just a two-faced piece of shit. He would tell Germany that you can't, sink vessels with Americans on it, which is understandable. But then he tells them you can't sink vessels with Americans on it, even if those vessels hold ammunitions for the allies that Germany is fighting against, or if those ships have defensive weapons that will shoot at the submarines when they came to the surface. Because the ethics of the day was you come to the surface as a submariner and you will give people a warning to get off the ship because you're going to sink it. Because most times they weren't really going after, battleships unless it was in the form of naval battle. They would go after like merchant ships and economic resources, which is very valuable, especially, Germany is going under a blockade. So they know how important it is to get your imports. So that's how they're using the submarines. So Woodrow Wilson was basically screwing over Germany. But I don't know, after all, it works out for the Allies, but still he wasn't being honest. As much as he tried to act like a Christ figure, he was full of shit.
Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary still hadn't dealt with Serbia, so the Central Powers enlisted some help. Bulgaria wished it was bigger and was still bitter about losing the Second Balkan War. The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's wildest dreams come true if they helped, so they signed on, and together they knocked out Serbia. The Serbian troops retreated through Albania, which was neutral but had some ties to Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary entered Albania in a friendly invasion to chase down the Serbians, many of whom escaped by sea. It's 1916, and a lot is happening. As if they didn't have enough enemies already, Germany added one more to the list. Portugal had been getting a bit chummy with the Allies behind the scenes, and Germany didn't like that one bit. Around the same time, the only sea battle of the war happened. Both sides had a new powerful class of battleships called dreadnoughts, but they were so expensive to build that neither side wanted to risk losing them in a battle, so they kept them in port, except for one time when they had a big fight and a bunch of them got damaged, so they didn't try that again.
If you're interested in naval battles, definitely check out this battle. It's one of the interesting ones that I've like heard about, and that includes Midway, the Philippine Sea, um, the Coral Sea. Like all the battles from World War II are very interesting too. But with everything that is in play here with Germany, and there's a lot of context with this, like Germany building up their navy to almost, try to combat Great Britain even before the war even started, and that's led to tension between the two countries. And then you have new ships being used like battle cruisers. We try to combine the firepower of a battleship with the speed and light mobility of a cruiser. And then you seeing that really not working out for Great Britain, but working out more so for Germany. But also you have like traps and counter traps, and then you have encounters and then another trap. It was a very interesting battle. And from my understanding, they have recreated this battle so you can understand it and see it in real time because of all the like the laws that was taken when they do different things. Like each time they would say change, go to this direction, or fire at this direction, they would have that law within their, like, I don't know, like report. So definitely check that out if you're interested in naval battles.
The UK started conscripting men to the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal.
I'm sorry I'm pausing, but I just want to talk about this with Great Britain going through conscription, because thanks to Dan Carlin Hardcore History, he revealed to me one of the craziest stories I ever heard within history. So I'm gonna go through this really quick. So Great Britain wasn't conscripting troops. Conscription means you're just forcing, or yeah, you're just basically forcing certain people within your country to enter into the army, into the military. And that wasn't really something they were doing at the time before. They mostly just accepted volunteers. But after everybody seeing how much people die and the type of life they have to live within these trenches, they wasn't getting any volunteers anymore, or not as enough as they needed. So they started doing like programs and stuff like that help get more troops. But even after doing conscription, they still need more people. So one little idea or program they did was they will use like young women at like age 18 to maybe like 20 or 30, and within like the cities of Great Britain, or the British Isles, they would go up to young men that wasn't in the military or wasn't in war at the time, and they would call them a coward and like a punk, yeah, equivalent to a punk, and all this different stuff to their face, and embarrass them. And after they get done, embarrass them in the streets in front of everybody in their hometown, they would put a white feather in like their lapel or their pocket of their like shirt, and that white feather showcase that you were a coward, that you was afraid to go and fight. And that was an idea from the military people, the political people, to get more people to fight in the war. It is very, very evil and very, very messed up, if you ask me. They they're using young men's desire to want to be respected and get the positive attention from women within their circle or their age group against them to go and fight in the war, which is a meat grinder. And these women are just going along with it because they think they're being patriotic, but it really sending most of them into to their deaths. And it really is so sad and tragic. Another example of why this war is so hard to study, but I just had to get that out.
To the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal. The longest and one of the bloodiest battles of the war started when the Germans launched an attack around the French city of Verdun. The French defended it desperately, leading to hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure,
I warned you at the start, I'm about to pause it, but this whole battle, which is so tragic because it sends in millions and hundreds of thousands of men to their deaths to defend this small plot of land in comparison to the whole front. But this was all done by design. The German general, I believe it was Hindenburg at this time, set up this meat grinder on purpose because he saw how much of the war would just turn into a meat grinder no matter what. You constantly throwing men at defensive and machine guns and barbed wire, you're just getting them killed. So his idea was to go and take Verdun, or at least entice France to make them think they was going to take Verdun, because Verdun was a viable place because of forests and other things that was in that area. So they enticed France to think they was going to take it from them. But instead of actually taking it from them, they set up like artillery batteries all around it and just kept enticing the French to come and dislodge them from this territory that had a clear overview of the Verdun region. And this led to basically a slaughter, a long slaughter that lasts about I think 8 or 9 months. And just the amount of artillery that was fired at Verdun, it will simply boggle your mind. Like each battle as you go through this war, more and more records are being set by the amount of artillery shells that are being fired at one place. And consider that Verdun is so small, like it's mind-boggling. 800,000 shells, probably even more, was fired just at this battle.
Verdun, the French defended it desperately, leading to hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure, the French called on its allies to do something to draw the Germans' attention away, so the British started their own long and brutal fight, the Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties on just the first day. It was also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology. The Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well until they ran out of supplies and got stuck. Seeing how well the Russians had been...
Okay, you're probably gonna be mad at me, but I feel like since I talked about Verdun, let me just at least give some respect to the British at the Somme, because the men that fought there was really like just wasted, if you ask me. They had this whole offensive battle planned out to try to take some territory to also help France. And most of these men that was used were, I would say, fresh. Like they was getting trained up. They was being made to be competent and being able to fight effectively. And the whole plan and hope was to win this war with this offensive or this battle at the Somme. And that didn't happen at all. They had plans on using artillery to knock out the barbed wire that was just covering the trenches of the Germans, and the artillery didn't do that at all. They used fragmentation artillery, which is, like I said, this was like nothing more than just, pieces of metal. And those pieces of metal aren't strong enough or dense enough or sharp enough to cut through barbed wire. So these men are going over the trenches, charging at the German lines, expecting all this barbed wire to be knocked out, and it is absolutely not knocked out. So they'll cut out in the open, and then you just have German machine guns just mowing them down, just absolutely just slaughtering them, and they're helpless out in no man's land. And even worse, sometimes you'll have little pockets of where the barbed wire was blown up. So when people notice that, of course, they're going to go and flock to where the openings are. But when you have so many men trying to get through such a confined space in the open, they get bunched up and slowed down. And that just makes them more of a bigger target for machine guns and artillery. This whole Battle of the Somme is, honestly, many people, from my understanding, during the war and after, was very pissed off at the hierarchy of the British military and government because of this battle, because of the amount of lives that was lost. And even after seeing it wasn't working, they still kept sending troops to do this stuff. And it is sick and tragic, if you ask me.
With 60,000 British casualties on just the first day. It was also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology. The Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well until they ran out of supplies and got stuck. Seeing how well the Russians had been doing, Romania decided now would be a great time to jump in and win the war, and then they got pounded. The Greeks were fighting amongst themselves about whether to join the war or not. The king liked the Central Powers, while the Prime Minister wanted to join the Allies. After a brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated and the country reunited. With Allied help, they began a new offensive. In the Middle East, Russia was pushing into Ottoman territory from the north. The British had also made a landing in Mesopotamia to protect Persia's oil fields, and they had also sent a small army up the Tigris River to try to take Baghdad, but the army got sieged in the town of Kut along the way, and eventually surrendered. A new offensive was launched from the south with all-out desert warfare. The offensive was aided by one famous British officer, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, who helped lead the Arab tribes in a revolt that wreaked havoc on the Ottoman supply lines. By the time 1917 rolled around, everyone was exhausted. There were mutinies in the French army, the German populace was starving, and the war had drained all of Russia's supplies. There was no clear winner, and it was still anyone's war. The only question now was, who was going to break first? And the answer was Russia. Tired of not eating, and mad that a crazy magic homeless guy was calling some of the shots, there was an uprising in Petrograd complete with riots and strikes. The riots turned into a full-scale revolution, and a new government overthrew the Tsar. Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the new government.
And the Tsar has himself, if you ask me, himself to blame for this. And I don't think he was necessarily I don't want to call him a good person. I want to say he wasn't as bad as compared to other incompetent leaders. And he even offered, like, he put the blame of the war on himself, and he went out to the front lines and decided to be more hands-on with this war. So with every defeat and loss of life, that just making his credibility go down lower. But if you ask me, it's kind of noble. Like, we don't get that nowadays. I guess that's what I feel. We don't get leaders nowadays that send our men, our troops, our sons and daughters off to war, and then when it doesn't go well, or it's tragic, or it's a great loss of life, or was done for selfish purposes, they don't say this was my fault. They don't go out of public office. They don't put themselves out there in danger with the troops. Now they sit their little asses in their office and keep willing and dealing with people's lives and money. That's what they do. So at least I'll give Tsar Nicholas that respect. He did something that our people nowadays don't do, and that's why I say kick him out.
And they pulled Russia out of the war. This was great news for Germany, who now only had to focus on the Western Front. But there was still one problem. The pesky United States of America was looking increasingly like it was going to join the war. America had been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the war and was getting super rich off the back of it, meaning it was in fantastic shape and was dangerous to the Germans. So Germany sent a telegram to Mexico saying, "Wouldn't it be crazy cool if you guys attacked America?" But the British intercepted the message, showed it to the Americans, and that was the final straw.
And Great Britain, they had the German codes, intelligence since the start of the war. That's part of the reason why the Battle of Jutland happens. I should have said it when that happened in the first part. I think that happened in the first part. It could have happened in the second part, to be honest with you. I could have got confused. But either way, that's why the Battle of Jutland happened, because Great Britain had the naval codes, or I'm sorry, the intelligence, the information codes of Germany. So when they try to set that trap at the Battle of Jutland, Great Britain already know what was going on, and that's why they went out there to try to trap them before they could trap them. Like, when you go into the actual naval battle, you'll see what I mean. But from the start, Great Britain already cracked the codes for Germany and was looking to all their messages and information.
American troops began shipping out to Europe. This was terrible news for Germany, and they knew their only hope now was to force France and the UK to surrender before the fresh American troops arrived. It was now or never, so they started one final attack. They converged their troops and hit hard at the Somme and pushed the Allies back. They hit a second time further north, then again and again. With each hit, the Germans were spending more and more resources, while the Allies were getting better and better at repelling their attacks. By the fifth punch, the Allies held the line and even pushed back. With American troops now arriving in larger numbers, the Allies launched a counterattack, and that was it. The Central Powers were being pushed back on all fronts. Bulgaria collapsed first, followed by the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally on November 11, 1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered. At the peace treaty, Germany was forced to reduce its military, accept war guilt, and pay the bill for the war. After indescribable suffering and millions dead, the world learnt its lesson and never had such an awful war again. For about 20 years.
And that Treaty of Versailles directly leads to World War II. When you consider, like, the money, like you said, had to be paid back to great powers for the war and the reduced military. And also there was a great feeling of, we should have won this war. And people felt that I think they felt the political government or the politicians was holding Germany back. And that's the only reason why they lost that war. So there was a lot of bitterness and hatred and anger and poverty and lack of value, inflation. Like, I think we almost all of us know about the German economy leading up to the Second World War and how that helped Hitler get into office. So just so much of this war leads to a lot of tragedy and suffering throughout the whole 20th century. And this war started 1914. And honestly, this war started partially because of stuff that happened in the previous 19th century, in the 1800s, like the Franco-Prussian War. I'm pretty sure that's referring to back to where we were saying at the start, when we said Alsace-Lorraine wanted to be retaken by the French. So I think that's going back to the Franco-Prussian War. And then that Franco-Prussian War actually leads to the creation of modern day Germany. So a lot of things just ties everything back together. It's not an isolated incident. Feelings and previous losses or wins play into the next war, next conflict. And sometimes you can have a change of allies, or you can have new allies like Britain and France. for centuries and centuries, Napoleon, but even going back to, stuff with like the English kings and them saying they have a title or a right to France while they were still French kings. There was just, centuries of animosity between Britain and France, but they overcame that. It was eventual allies twice when they mattered the most. So stuff constantly changes. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. I know I talked a lot for such a short video, but it is what it is. It is called oversimplified, so I try to give as much as I could. I still try to hold back on some parts because if I were to talk about everything, it'd be like an hour long. And I don't think you signed up for that. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'll do more of his stuff if you like it. But like, share, and subscribe. It's your boy Logos, and I'll see you next time. Peace.